Welcome to chapter number 5. We are going to get into, as you can see, project times and costs. I want to emphasize that with the types of students that you are, I'm not going to try to turn you into accounting people. I'm going to leave it at a very high level where you don't have to know a lot about how budgets are created, because in industry you would have accounting people. Every organization has an accounting person to help you develop these, but I just want you to realize the importance of it. So once again, here's our map. It's on our 5th chapter. So understanding the project times and the costs, because a lot of times the costs are affected by the times, and you need to do some estimating for time, cost, and the resources. Different methods for doing the estimating, and we'll focus on 2, top down and bottom up. Each one has strengths and weaknesses, and again, different types of costs. So here's again the chapter outline. You need to try and get an estimate. Now, when you get an estimate, it's going to be wrong. So you say, well, why do I bother? Because studies have shown that it's better to estimate, to try and get a rough idea rather than just flying by the seat of your pants or just not having any clue. And when you came to university, you probably sat down or thought about at least a bit, how much is it going to cost me? If you had no clue the cost of going to school, then you should have talked to somebody at your school, and they would have given you some guidelines and said, well, this is how much you can expect to pay for books. This is how much you can expect to pay for, say, transportation. And one of the positives of the pandemic is you don't have transportation costs anymore. You don't have to pay for an LRT pass or parking pass or some of those types of things. So there can be some financial benefit to being able to sit at home and not have some of the costs that you had before. But I'll also say there may have been some people who came to university and just looked at tuition. Well, there's other costs besides that. The transportation time. Oh, what about books? Anybody realize how really expensive those books are? And let's face it, in today's world, even though it's not mandatory at some schools, and it is mandatory at others, BYOD, bring your own device, laptop, tablet. I can't imagine going to university and not having, say, a laptop. Like, it can, and I understand there are financial reasons for doing that, but it really puts you behind if you have to, say, go to the lab to do all your computing, or if you don't have the technology. It's just sort of expected. So things along that line. Maybe some of you had to reduce the number of hours of work that you do. So 2 types of estimating. One is top down and then bottom up, and we'll talk about those in more depth. You need these times and cost estimates to support good decisions. Otherwise, I will guarantee you that every year some people don't pay enough attention to the cost of school, and not just the financial cost, but even like the time cost. I didn't realize it was going to be so much work. I thought this was going to be like high school. So I had to give up volleyball, and I had to give up, in my own personal case, when I went to university, I had to give up one of my favorite sports, which is curling. Not a particularly expensive sport, but I just didn't have the time to dedicate to that. And so things that you've had to give up in your own personal life, skiing, snowboarding, whatever the case may be. But you need to do an estimate. Otherwise, there will be some people who don't do that, and they wind up starting off, oh, I can't afford this. I didn't realize it was going to be so expensive, or that reduction, those 2 shifts a week that I don't have anymore. Those 8 shifts a month, I can't afford to live like this. I have to get a roommate, which I don't want to have, et cetera, et cetera. And again, you need to pay attention to the cash flow needs, student loans, not student loans, bursaries, all of those kind of things. So there's a whole long list, way longer than this, as to why you need to do some estimates. Some of those students who didn't had to drop out. You need to pay attention to how far into the future you plan, the complexity. Again, in the last chapter, we talked about structure, padding estimates, like, oh, I want to go to a movie with my friend, and I want to borrow, some money from my parents or somebody, and it's like, well, it's really going to cost me this for the movie and this much for popcorn, and I'll add an extra $20. In organizations, that costs them money. So if you pad the estimates too much, it's just the money gets spent, and you have huge cost overruns. And sometimes once you start a project, you don't have a choice. There was a very wealthy person, who was building a football stadium in Los Angeles. It's just completed in 2020. The original cost was $2 billion. The final cost was $5 billion. $3 billion over the original amount. They're not happy. But once you get started on constructing it, you don't have a choice. Like, well, what do? Finish half of it and say, no, we ran out of money? And that does happen. So you need to identify who's responsible for the different costs and resources, get several people to do estimates, try and estimate what is normal, if that's possible. One of the hardest things to do if there's a high degree of variability, setting up some contingencies, and I'll talk about that and give you a slightly different take than what the book does on how to set up contingencies. Top-down estimates are from, say, senior management, and they'll come to you and say, here's $5,000. They don't know the details, but you got $5,000 to do something. Bottom up comes from the frontline people, and they say, we need this, this, and the other thing. So they have much more detail, and then they'll cost it up and say, well, we need $7,000. And management says, you got $5,000. So two different approaches. Top-down estimates tend to be good for strategic, like big, high-level things. Bottom-up is better for when there's costs and time is important, like getting things done quickly. And you can see the list. So again, I'm not going to go through each one, but there are benefits to each one, and we'll go through that in a moment. Preferred approach is to do some top-down estimates. Kind of roughly is how much is this roughly going to cost? If we want to build a new event center in Calgary. You should also do bottom up if you have the time. Try and get a plan. So let's try and simplify this to something that some of you will have done. You've decided to go on a trip. We'll just make it simple. Just a weekend away. All right? Well, okay, the fact that you've defined that is it 2 nights or 1 night accommodation? You're going to drive, or are you going to fly? If you fly, you're going to need a car when you get there. What kind of place are you going to stay at? You can stay at a place that's budget hotel or medium or a pretty fancy place. And then what are we going to do when we get there? Are we going to go out to see a play? Are we going to go out to see a sporting event? Are we going to go do some excursions? On and on. Are we just going to go and people watch and things along this line? So a huge variety. You can go, if any of you have gone to Vegas, you can go to Vegas, and I've had students do that, and they've gone for a couple days, and they go and stay at like a Vegas hostel, very inexpensive, and they spend their money on, well, I think we know what they spend their money on. And then you get some other people who go to Vegas and they stay in like a big fancy hotel that's hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a night. They eat at high-end restaurants. They go to and they get really good tickets for, say, top, premium seats, what they call the Golden Horseshoe, for, say, Cirque du Soleil and things along this line. They're not way up in the nosebleeds. So there's a huge amount of difference between going to Vegas for a few days. Top down requires consensus. And again, don't worry too much about each one of these methods. The accounting people are going to do that, or the finance people will do that. The bottom up has a template, so like a form that you can fill in and kind of give, well, where are we going to spend? $125 to $150 a night for a hotel. things along that line. So again, here's an apportionment. You got $500,000. You give, and people who deal with project management would know these percentages. 20% to design, 30% to programming, testing is 40%. I know that the information design students I taught last year, testing is a huge part of what they do. Not just the design and not just the programming, but they test it and test it and test it. And then they need to provide documentation and actually produce the finalized product. Here's just a form for complexity, and you get a weighting factor. Again, don't worry about, each organization is going to do this differently. This is just to give you an idea of a way to sort of make it more numerical and more smarter. So then here's just an example of where you calculate it. So it gives you a total of the 660 is the complexity rating. All right, and then here's just a simple Excel spreadsheet. You have estimates of the number of days. This is something that would be called, we're not going to take in this course because it's not really used in industry, something called PERT, which is Program Evaluation and Review Technique. But really what it does is, rather than saying the approval is going to take 1 day, well, it could take as little as 1 day, or it could take as many as 3. I'm personally waiting for something to happen. Yesterday I notified them. They said it will take 24 to 72 hours before it'll be resolved. So it wasn't resolved yesterday. So I'm expecting that the fact that it'll be resolved within, now 24 hours have gone by, it'll be resolved in the next 48 hours. And then again, you can put in the risk levels here. It's just you don't have to do this. It's just, again, it's a potential tool to try and, again, qualify. You've got the high estimate, you have the range, etc. So you try and get into more and more levels of detail as you go, the macro level and the more detailed levels on the different phases. Top-down end estimates used for, is it like in the ballpark? If somebody said, you said, oh yeah, let's take a 2-week trip to Hawaii. And then when you start looking it up and you say, oh, well, that's going to be $10,000. Like, oh, nope, you don't need to know the detail. I mean, I'm sure you can go online or come up with an idea yourself. It's like, oh, that doesn't work. I've got 3. I guess we're not going to Hawaii. We don't want to get on a plane, go there, look around, then go back on the plane and go home. So, but it gives you a rough idea. And it tends to be less accurate because it's just very high level. And the bottom-up approaches, you sit down. Okay, how many days are we going? How much does the hotel cost? How much is food going to cost us? How much the excursion is going to cost us? Very cheap if you just want to go there and sit on a beach, right? But if you want to go and actually do some other things, like going on tours or go to some specialized places, it can get very expensive. So this is just, again, different estimates, but it tends to be a bit more accurate because you tend to put in more effort. When you go to do your budgeting for your project, I'm not going to critique. Like I said, I'm not going to critique the fact that you are going to be out a little bit. I'm not going to question how much you're going to spend because there's a range. You could say that you're going to go on a trip, to continue that analogy, and you're going to spend $50 a night. Okay, fine. I'm not going to say, oh, like whatever. I've traveled where I spent less than $50 a night recently at an Airbnb. Okay, if that's what you want to do. And then there's other ones that are, the most I think I've ever spent is like $400. Well, actually, there's one that's $500 a night. Yeah, $500 a night. Okay, that was 2 nights. Okay, that was enough. So you give me $50, fine. You give me $500, I'm going to say fine. I'm not going to critique that. So have fun with that. Don't sweat the details on that. Work breakdown structure gives you your list of things to do. When you first started this course, one of the things or any other course, you probably want to know the WBS. What do I need to do? How many assignments are there? Is there a term paper? Is there a midterm? Is there a final? Then you start looking at things like, how much is the final worth? In this course, we'll make the final exam very low weight. It's not going to be, well, it can be stressful for you, but we're going to try and set this up. You've got the course easily, sorry, my apologies, easily passed by the time you walk into the final exam. So everybody should have the course passed before you walk into the final exam. Different types of costs, direct costs, which are labor. So an instructor teaching the course is direct costs. Overhead would be the chair position or the dean position, things along that line. Administrative costs would be for the senior management or like the accounting people, etc. So again, just give me a very brief overview. Don't go into a huge amount of detail about this. If you about the direct and costs and direct overhead and admin, I'm going to have no way to honestly see whether it's correct or not. Here's the way to look at things. It's important that you pay attention to this in the sense that when you decided, before you even applied and started to put your money down and make an effort, when you decided to go to university, for probably a lot of you at this point, was the most expensive day of your life. And now that you are in probably around third year, you've got third and fourth year to pay for the remaining term. So even though you haven't paid for, year 4 yet, you've said you're going to, and you are committed to that, even though your actual costs are lower. And then, of course, you have to pay attention to when do you pay them. So it's paying your tuition at the beginning of the term. Now, refining your estimates, finding out some costs that are hidden. You find out that, the conditions are not normal. The things go wrong. And, we want to not go there for a 2-week trip to Hawaii. We want to go for 3. Okay. People get overly optimistic. People have a tendency to underestimate the length of time it takes to do something. So if you say, I want to go and do this for 2 hours, and then it takes them 3, that can cost you extra money. So again, here's this figure showing the creating a database for the information so you develop, and you talk to people. You talk to your MIS people, programming, etc. You develop, and if you want to break your report into costing under labor, materials, and equipment, whatever your project may be, then that's fine. And I don't need to know down to the hourly rate of what you're going to pay your housekeeping or your cleaning people to clean up after your fundraising event. Mega projects, big dollars, they also tend to have really big, the timelines are longer, and they can lead to big errors. That example that I used where the $2 billion project became a $5 billion project, that's very, it's not unheard of. Shell Oil a few years ago had a $2 billion project. By the time they got done, it cost them double that. It cost them 4. Things like, you see the high-speed rail lines. In France, they decided to buy some new trains, okay, for their high-speed rail lines. They bought them, and then after they had bought them, they realized that the trains were too large to go through some of the tunnels. Yep. That's a problem. We've got a train that now cannot go through the tunnel. All right. That's a very expensive mistake. And you can see the white elephant at the bottom here. Projects that are over budget, they're undervalued, and then they're very costly to maintain. And sometimes company, like you'll see if you go on the internet, like you say if a place is developed like an airport and it doesn't get used. There's been airports in Montreal, where they built an airport, spent a lot of money on it, and didn't get used to its full capacity for a very long time. Even Edmonton built a new airport several years ago now, but they had a little airport right downtown called the Muni, or Municipal Airport, in downtown Edmonton. Of course, business people would rather fly into downtown, and then just they're minutes away, 15, 20 minutes away from their meetings, as opposed to the airport in Edmonton is quite a ways south of Edmonton. So you get there and you still be like, say, a good hour and a half from where you'd have to go, by the time you get off and organize the stuff. So, but eventually they closed the municipal airport, so it all transitioned to their international airport just south of Edmonton. So that would be considered a white elephant, at least at a certain point in time. All right. This is just ways to reference the forecasting, just to categorize it. Again, it's just more for just information. This is not something, again, you're going to get tested on in detail, and just a different way of breaking things down. But I'm not here to teach you to be an accountant or budgeting person. And again, here are the key terms. So just look them over and say, yep, I can write 1 or 2 sentences on each one of these. And some of the others, like the apportionment and the RCF and stuff like that, don't really, and the ratio method, don't really pay a lot of attention to that kind of thing. They're not the main points. Things like overhead costs, yes. And bottom up, yes. Top down, yes. And time and cost databases, even to a degree. So those are the things you need to focus in on. I hope you enjoyed chapter number 4. Or 5, I should say.